Throwing rocks, skipping rope, laughing at all my best friends' jokes. Things I loved when I was a kid. Muddy roads, muddy feet, I didn't live on no blacktop street. Things have changed a lot, but I never did. And I don't wanna think about tomorrow. I don't need anything money can buy. I don't have to beg, steal, or borrow. I just wanna live until I die. Living right, living in this little old town I grew.
No, I made it.
For you, and without further ado, I'm going to ask Randy Davis and Drew to come up, and who's presenting today? Both of you? Okay. From, I always get it wrong, Mountjoy Bresler.
It was Mountjoy Bresler, now it's Mountjoy Chilton.
Mountjoy Chilton Medley. And they are going to go over the management comments and then any questions that we have.
Thank you very much. We will take just approximately 15 minutes. We just want to go through the audit, the opinion letters, management letters, of course, and some communication with the governing board. Drew's going to do the majority of the presentation. Just want to let you know as to what we've done. There's 3 types of audit reports. We've got the one under just generally accepted accounting principles, generally accepted accounting standards, the government auditing standards, sometimes called the yellow book, and then also the single audit that we will review with you. We'll open it up for any questions once Drew runs through those, and we'd be glad to answer whatever comes up. And if for some reason we can't get you the answer today, we will get back to you just as soon as we can. So if Drew wants to go through those now, that'd be great. And feel free to ask us any questions that you may have.
Good afternoon. Before I get started, I just want to say appreciate and thanks all the cooperation and efforts from Linda and Mary Pfister and the whole accounting department. So a lot of work is put into preparing the CAFR. As Randy mentioned, we performed our audit in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, government auditing standards, and the OMB A133. Our first audit report is included in the CAFR. It's on page 13. Basically spells out, we performed the audit of the financial statements, the management prepared the financial statements, and we provide an opinion. We've issued an unqualified or a clean audit opinion on the 2009 financial statements, which this is a good thing. Wasn't going to get into the detail of the financial statements, but if you've not had the opportunity, I would encourage you to read the management discussion and analysis, which begins on page 15 in the CAFR. Copy of the CAFR. Now, this report has been out since December 2009 and is just the financial statements of the government for the year ended June 30, 2009. But in this report, the management prepares about a 10-page summary of the financial statement highlights for 2009 and provide some really good analysis and comparison for the year. Our second audit report is the report on internal controls over financial reporting and compliance. And it is actually included in a separate, it's not included in the CAFR, but it's included in a separate report we call the single audit report. And again, this report has been out since February.
Commissioner Rumke, is this report online so that if the public wants to look at the report, that they have the ability to see what we're talking about?
They are online,
Okay,
the
thank you.
CAFR and the single audit.
Okay, thank you.
Our report over internal control over financial reporting and compliance basically says that as part of our audit, we considered the internal controls of the government. And in part of that consideration, if we find any control deficiencies, we'll report them to you. We did not identify any control deficiencies that would be classified as a material weakness for 2009. So we did not identify any significant control deficiencies. We also did not identify any material non-compliance with laws or regulations, grants, things of that nature. That's what that report says. It does not provide an opinion on the internal controls, as that's not what we're supposed to do or we're engaged to do. Our third report is also included in the single audit report, and is the report on compliance with the federal grants. And it's also on internal controls of federal grants. Again, this report did not identify any internal control weaknesses in regards to the federal grants. It did not identify any non-compliance with any of the federal grant requirements. We've also issued, and you should have a copy of, a letter that's to the Budget and Finance Committee. This is required communication from our professional standards that we communicate to you any significant audit findings. We did not have any significant audit findings for the June 2009 audit. We didn't have any disagreements with management. It was a clean audit. That's what this letter basically summarizes.
Then what does council have before him? What is this?
That's the last thing I'm going to get to.
Okay, I thought you were
Yes.
done. Or councilmember have questions?
I have a question.
Councilmember Crosby.
When you mentioned disagreements with management, is that you disagreeing with our commissioners with how they're handling their financial issues, or is it if somebody internally has a disagreement? Can you please clarify?
Sure. A disagreement with management might have to do with the accounting treatment of a certain transaction. If there was a certain transaction that management had recorded one way, and based on our research and the accounting guidance, we said, well, no, we think it should be recorded this way. You may not see eye to eye on such a transaction. So it really doesn't have anything to do with any type of internal disagreements, but more having to do with accounting and financial reporting.
So if somebody has a disagreement and you don't see eye to eye on it, that would be considered a disagreement, correct? Not a...
If the disagreement had affected the financial statements, then it might show up in this report, this letter.
I'll stop, thank you.
Councilmember James.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I wasn't I don't know, I missed something. I wasn't aware that this dealt with the financial statement. I don't know how I missed that. I mean, I looked at the information in our packet and it wasn't clear to me. Am I the only one? I don't know. I'm kind of feeling like I don't have my financial report in front of me. I didn't even review it for this meeting today, and that could just be my oversight. Maybe everybody else is ahead of me on that. I'm not even too sure what you would be looking for in an audit to even know what questions I should be asking or not asking at this point. I know that one of the questions I would have, which maybe you answer this or not, is whether or not for the ordinances and resolutions and the state statutes that we have in place, are we abiding by those when it comes to our expenses, and are we honoring what the ordinances and resolutions say? Is that something that your group would audit?
If there are certain things that government has to comply with.
Yes.
That would have a direct and material impact to the financial statements. Yes, we test for that compliance, and if we found that the government was not in compliance, we would have reported it to you in this report.
Okay, so do you give reference to the statutes and ordinances and resolutions that you would have referred to view compliance? Is that a listing that we could find somewhere?
You know, we don't identify in the report itself. We don't identify the exact if it's statutes that we would have tested for.
Okay, Chair, I'm not sure where my mind is supposed to be around this, or what we're supposed to be doing, or what our role is.
This is simply the presentation of the audit that we get every year from our audit team that audits our annual budgets. And this was an opportunity to go through that audit. I know there were some questions referred out of it a couple council meetings ago about items in the audit. That's simply what this is. Ask the people who actually did the audit questions about the information we received back in actually January. We got it all.
Okay, so how many council members behind the horseshoe have their audit that they're looking at right now? No one. Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
And I did announce at the last Budget and Finance meeting that we would have this discussion, as well as Thursday night, that we'd be having our audit discussion. So it has been previously announced, but we can have it at the next meeting too. Anyone? Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Chair. We have, I guess, an abbreviated, this is the February 4th, 2010 cover letter, and what you have has exhibits as well. Is this included in what you?
That is the audit, the management letter. I haven't yet got to that. It was
right. Okay. One of the questions I had, so the audit covers LFECG, but it does not cover Lextran or the library. Is that correct? Is that accurate?
Those component units are included. Those financials are included in the comprehensive annual report, but we did not audit those component units. Those are audited by other auditors.
Okay. You indicated that you weren't giving opinion about financial controls. Is that?
We don't provide an opinion on the internal controls. That's correct.
But you have indicated that you found no problems with internal controls. I was just trying to understand the subtlety of the.
Well, what we actually do is we test various controls to see, are the controls there that are said to be there. We test those unless we're not giving an opinion that they're operating on the effectiveness of them. We're saying the ones that are in place there that we've been told they're operating the way they're designed to operate. We can't give you an opinion over the entire internal controls because that's not part of the engagement. But part of our planning of the audit is to go in and look at internal controls in determining the areas that we look at. We can rely on some of your controls, some of them, and we test. And those are the types of things, but we do not actually give an opinion on the entire effectiveness of the entire internal control system. But if we identify something, we bring it to your attention.
What do you typically give internal control opinions in other?
No, we do not give opinions on internal controls. Basically, what we're engaged to do is give an opinion on the fairness of the financial statements as a whole.
But I guess my question, in other clients or other circumstances, do you give opinions about internal controls?
No, we do not do that.
Okay, so that's just outside the scope of what
that's
services
outside the
you
scope
provide.
Of a general financial audit.
Okay. And the city would retain a different consultant for that type of a opinion?
I mean, it could be someone, if you wanted to have that, that's in a separate engagement that would be done to address, if you wanted someone to review your internal controls in full. A lot of times those are called agreed upon procedures, where you will identify certain ones that you want to look at, and you will give an opinion based on what you've done and the findings of that.
I'm just trying to understand how common it is to get an opinion on internal controls.
A lot of times you'll have what's called a SAS 70 audit, or for some service providers, they'll go in and review the controls there and provide a report just for that.
Would you recommend that we do that frequently or periodically, or?
So I think what we're doing in terms of a general review of your internal controls, we identify the areas where we feel that the risk is high. We will test those controls. We're just not allowed to give an opinion because that's not the function of the engagement. But we are required by Generally Accepted Accounting Standards to test the controls in order to determine whether we can rely upon those or not.
Okay. So do we need more? That's my question.
No. My personal opinion is no, you do not need more.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to be sure I understood what you said about, previously you said that you do look at whether statutes were followed. Is that correct? That would imply state statutes, is that correct?
There would be various statutes, various requirements of grant agreements, those type
And based on some questions we had a meeting or so ago, then do you also look at local ordinance or resolutions that relate to the budget and our finances, whether we're complying with those or not? You look at our local ordinances and resolutions?
If those resolutions had a direct and material impact of the financial statements, meaning if you had non-compliance with them, it would impact the financial statements, then we would have tested for compliance.
Okay. And just to be clear, your audit, does it include urban service funds? It includes all of LFUCG's funds?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor Gray.
I did have a question. It related to, I don't have my statements in front of me, guys, so forgive me, but Linda, I think we had talked earlier about the prepaid items in the asset summary. The $30 million, can you all share with us what that represents?
I believe that's related to the overfunding of the police and fire pension line. So that's going to be there to fund future obligations.
So is this coming through our general fund? This is the funding that is accumulated, has been accumulated?
Well, if you look at your general fund,
Right.
For 2009, the government issued a new bond,
Right.
approximately, I believe, $77 million, related to the police and fire pension. So in the general fund for 2009, all of that bond revenue shows up as revenue in that year, and everything that, and in turn, all of it was expensed in that year as well. So there's no, you only see the prepaid item on the statement of net assets on the government-wide financials, which is on the full accrual basis. So really, it's already run through the general fund. That whole transaction is already run through the general fund for fiscal year 2009.
Okay. That $30 million is not the bond proceeds value, is it?
It came from the bond proceeds.
It is?
It came from the bond proceeds, but it's not, obviously, it's not the entire bond proceeds.
Right. Yeah, because the entire bond was 70 million and change, right? But this is where we are holding it as an asset. The 30 million is being held of the bond proceeds. I thought that was in the fire and pension separate. That's not so this is income from.
Yeah, I think that's on the government-wide statements, as Drew was saying. It's where they're on the full accrual basis, whereas on the fund, it reports the income the proceeds as it comes in and the payments that are going out.
Excuse us. Could you come to the microphone?
I'm sorry.
That's great. Thanks.
On the government-wide statements, they're on the full accrual basis, which records items based on when the expense is incurred and not basically when it's paid out. On the fund financial statements, the bond proceeds were brought in and shown as proceeds, and then when they were paid out, they were shown as expenditure. But when you look at the government-wide statements, that expenditure that was paid out, it was not fully for that current year. Part of it was a prepaid item that's going to take care of the expenditures in later years. There's no actual funds that we have sitting there. They've just been put into the pension fund, and we have overfunded basically that amount. And that prepaid will go to offset future expense of the pension fund.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those areas where I sometimes think I don't understand everything I know.
Well,
so the real issue, I think, is, if I boil it down, is how that number relates to our current funding through the bonds that we have approved for the fire and pension. Does it have any relationship to the 72 million and the 30 million that we've just approved in terms of the actuarial impact?
Yes, it's all, in my understanding, it's all been paid in to the fund, but it wasn't required because there's the expenditure that we had. The expense was not that much. What I'm saying, some of that prepaid, my understanding is it goes to cover the future pension costs for, another year. That's why it's called prepaid here.
Okay, so that's why then it would have an impact on, my interpretation of that is that it would have an impact on the actuarial
Yes.
analysis.
Right.
Okay, would that have been in last year's actuarial report then?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Would this impact, or would not impact, would the influence of that would have been, that 30 million prepaid, would have been included in the actuarial analysis for the same fiscal year?
Yes, and it will be included in the analysis for the next year because we have some that's prepaid,
Okay.
so you will not have that big of a deposit.
Yeah. Sorry.
There is I know you don't have this in front of you, but there's a footnote in the CAFR, which this is on page 92, and provides really a summary of the actuarial report and where the $30 million originated from.
Okay. And this may be related to, this is my only second question, and it's just a question related to, what was the language we were using earlier for management report? The management report addresses not administrative issues, but not operating control. Thank you, control issues. So with the Sarbanes didn't apply to government and municipalities, and FASB. But the question that I have would be related to, is it, across the country, we even had exposure locally to issues related to accountability, fraud detection, that sort of thing. To what extent do you guys, does the audit actually examine or inquire about fraud issues? Fraud detection, I guess, is a better question.
or, our audit's not required to find fraud.
Right. Are there any protocols that you normally engage through the audit?
We do a pretty extensive inquiry with employees and management in all departments, and among other things. But that's one source that we go out and we meet with management and we inquire directly about their knowledge of fraud, where they believe fraud could exist.
So that is part of the protocol. I mean, it has elevated over time, and the question really relates to the procedure or the process that you all are engaging. So there is a process, is what you're saying?
Yes, there is a process. Basically, it's an inquiry type with various individuals within the city, employees, management, and again, we're not doing a fraud audit, but if anything comes to our attention, we're required to bring that to your attention.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And next up, we have Councilmember Crosby. But before you go, I want to make sure our council members understand that what they also handed out today, we're going to keep those recommendations in committee, and it'll be an ongoing process. But the main audit book that we want them to be here to answer questions on is important because in the budget process, it's the only real data we got that have been audited, scrubbed. It's the only real numbers that we can use when we're deliberating on the budget and what operating expenses should or were or could be. So that's why it's important to have that book with you during the budget process. Mr. Crosby.
Walk me through, I'm going to follow up with Councilmember Gray's, or Vice Mayor Gray's, question regarding fraud. And if I understand it correctly, you say that you do extensive questioning and there's a process that a commissioner or a director or somebody could go through to actually report that to you. At that point, you make some kind of determination, I'm assuming, as to whether or not you think there's been some sort of fraud. From that point, if it's been reported, you then just said that it's your duty to report that back to the council or back to the administration. And then from that point, where would it go if you make some kind of recommendation?
When you say recommendation, you mean if we have, through our inquiry, determined that there possibly is fraud or
possibly not. I mean, somebody could report it and you may disagree with them. Is it still your duty to report back that this has been suggested?
We will review and do as much work as we can to determine if we feel that there is fraud there based on what someone is telling us. And if we feel that possibly there is a possibility of that, then we would go to a level above where that fraud was pointed that it might possibly exist.
Could there be conflict if somebody at a director level is insinuating that there's fraud occurring and it might be somebody who's above them? Could that create some court? I'm just trying to understand the process here.
When you say
a conflict where maybe oftentimes you have people who are in positions who may assume that something is happening, but it could be about somebody they directly supervise, who directly supervise them. In that case, you're saying if somebody reports something, your next step is to go to, for example, if it's somebody they might be insinuating fraud against who's above them, you would be going to that person?
No, we wouldn't be going to the person where the fraud is considered. We would go to someone above that level to make sure that we have someone who would be able to review this with us that wouldn't have a conflict. If someone was a worker, an employee, and there was a supervisor, and the employee was saying the supervisor was committing fraud, we wouldn't go to that supervisor and ask them. One, we would do some inquiry and review some transactions to see if what we thought, and then we would go above that.
So let me just understand this. I'm going to give two examples. If a employee was insinuating a director was having fraudulent accounting practices, you would then go to the commissioner level, correct? Because it would be up above a director.
If that's, normally we would go to the commissioner level, unless there's another area within the agency where we felt we could go to.
Okay, I'll come back to that. If there was a director who did it to a commissioner, I would assume then it would go to the mayor. one level above?
That's normally what would, that's normally what we would look at, is if there was someone that we were considered, if there's a position that would be considered to be somewhere fraud was being perpetrated, then we would try to go above that level.
Okay, and then do you make recommendations ever for it to be, if there's something that's been brought to your attention, do you ever make recommendations above and beyond just notifying the next person above, or do you make recommendations, for example, that it go into certain committees within to be examined within government, since your role is not really look at fraud, I guess?
Yeah, I think our responsibility is to report it to the entity and let them investigate it, and they would make the decision as to what would be done, whether something needed to be reported to the police or whatever. But we would be the ones who would recommend it to the commissioner, the board, whoever, and say, this is what, we have these facts here, and we feel that this is something that could be going on. We would like for you all to look into this.
Okay, and then you're done after that point.
Well, I mean, we have met our responsibility. That doesn't mean we're completely done, because I'm sure there'll be questions come back and say, well, you might want to look at these transactions. They might ask us to look at various transactions to see if we see anything in there. Now, then again, you have to get to the point where do you actually have to stop that engagement and start a new engagement, a fraud engagement.
And would that be brought to our attention in your report if you had anybody report any, like you said, there's definitely a process that either commissioners or directors or employees have to go through if they have questions regarding accounting practices and they report those to you, do we see what their questions might be? Do you report that anywhere in your report?
I don't think it would be in this report here, because again, this is not a fraud report, but it would be something that would be brought to the attention of whoever who we felt the responsible board should be.
So I guess my next question is, if something like of this nature is reported to you, there's no way you don't report it to us per se. You're reporting it to somebody within LFUCG. And so if I'm to ask, I would like to see what's been reported over the past 3 years that you've investigated and have made a determination on. Who would I go to get that information?
Who would
If there was such communication, it would have probably been the commissioner level.
And would you all have, I would assume you keep records if this has been reported to you, if we were to request that type of information?
If there's been any fraud.
If anybody has brought to your attention anything that they wanted you to look at through the accounting practices, regardless of your determination, you're the point, it sounds like, of decision as to whether or not it gets reported to a commissioner or not. And I guess my question is, over the past 3 years, how many of these have we had and have you made determinations on? And then where have they gone to after they leave your hands? Can you get that information?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. And then my next question is, besides the introduction in this book, has anybody within LFUCG written any part of this audit?
The financial statements are prepared by management. So the entire document you're looking at, outside of our 2-page audit report, our audit opinion letter, is the product of LFUCG management.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Lalos.
I believe my question has changed a little bit. So you're saying this was written by LFUCG management? And this was written by LFUCG management? You said everything but the 2-page.
No, the financial statements, the CAFR itself, Yes, it's prepared by the Department of Finance and Department of Accounting.
Okay.
Now, this report that you have in your hand is prepared by us. That is our management letter.
Both these?
Yes, that is correct.
Well, this is an interesting approach to audits, but thank you.
Councilmember Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our government has put in a new accounting system, and we had, going back, I guess, to the prior mayor, we started having some implementation issues. I just wondered, since you all have audited the accounting for several years here, if you feel that the software system we have and the accounting reports we have are more than adequate and improved from what we previously had prior to that time. Just if you had a comment on that.
But, I believe it's getting better. We've actually, I've addressed 2 recommendations in our audit management letter, actually address some of the accounting system software issues, you might say. If I wanted to specifically, on page 2, right now this CAFR is really prepared separately outside of the PeopleSoft accounting system through Excel and Word documents. Or one recommendation we made was maybe putting some resources together and that might be more efficient if the software itself can somehow produce the financial statements that are required under generally accepted accounting principles.
I mean, that's been one of my complaints, is because we have the budget in one format, and we have our monthly accounting in another format, and then the CAFR is another format. So when you're trying to compare your budgeting to your actual operating expenses to your audited report, there's not a continuity of the way the documents are presented. Do you see, I know CAFR, I believe they specify the way you have to report, and so we're obligated to use that format for CAFR, is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
All right. Do you see any possibility that we could have all of our accounting on the same format, or do you see that's more of an internal management issue? We're going to have to develop that over time.
Well, I don't think you can get away from generally accepted accounting principles. I'm not sure you can get away from the budgeting process. I think every government probably deals with that issue. In here are some, they do their best to try to reconcile the different methods of accounting. There is a budget and actual comparison in here, which is reconciled back to the government financial statements.
Yeah, well, just for the record, I rely on the CAFR as my primary source of financial information. And I suppose that'll also be improving because as we have 2 or 3 more years of historical data, we'll be reporting that in the CAFR, because I think when we changed formats, it made it difficult to compare previous years with current year data. Would that be a fair statement to say?
I think that's probably fair, although you've been under this format probably since 2003 is when this government switched over to this reporting format.
Yeah. Okay. I just have one more question, then I'll wrap this up maybe. The other question is, when you were sort of testing our system just to see if you felt like it was operating efficiently and it would catch irregularities or fraud or mistakes, what types of tests did you use? Could you sort of outline that very generally and don't get into too much detail on that?
Well, most of our, I had to summarize some of our control testing would be on cash disbursements, cash receipts, payroll, the large dollar items. Again, we're not really looking to do that test of controls to form an opinion, but more to understand them and how they would impact our other audit test.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And council members, we have a pretty full agenda, and we're going to keep this in the committee with the management letters for our next meeting when we get back into budget and finance after the budget. So if there's any other questions on just the CAFR, without going into the management recommendations, I think see Councilman Crosby up. If you want to continue, and then we'll keep this in committee.
I just have one question, pretty simple.
Absolutely.
And
Go ahead.
and we don't have them here too often to where we can ask questions, so.
But we're going to have them back.
Okay. Well, I'm not on budget and finance, so.
It doesn't matter.
I know I
You can
can
sit
come, but
down.
I don't
Yeah.
always know, as you know, it's not always possible. So anyway, back to this book. I just want to make sure I understand. The only thing that you prepared for this was page 13 and 14?
Is that the audit report?
Yeah. The one with the,
That's our audit opinion.
that's it?
That's correct. In fact, if you're looking at page 13, the very first paragraph of this audit report says that the financial statements are the responsibility of management. You'll audit those financial statements and then provide an opinion on them.
I just want to make sure I understand. Thank you.
Anyone else on questions on the CAFR? All right, well, we'll keep it into committee and bring those topics up. I'll turn the meeting back over to
Just continue.
continue on. Okay. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, if we could flip-flop the agenda a little bit and go ahead and talk about the business occupational licensing fee, and then wrap up with the current financials through March, and then the debt discussion. That's okay with everybody? I'll have Mr. O'Mara come up and lead us off. Everyone should have a copy of the presentation in front of them. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair. The mayor's proposed budget includes a proposal to amend the minimum license fee, and it is just has a few talking points. The proposal in the proposed budget is to first is change the due date. Currently, the due date for the minimum license fee is December 31st, prior to the year for the minimum license fee. So, taking calendar 2010 into consideration, the $100 minimum license was due December 31st of 2009. What's being proposed is that starting next year, the due date for the minimum license fee would be April 15th within the year that the license fee applies. So if you would take the example I just gave, instead of the minimum license fee being due December 31st of this year, 2010, it would be due April 15th of 2011 for the calendar year 2011. The second part of the proposal is currently we issue a license, a piece of paper, and they are required to post that in their business location. That requirement would be dropped, that a license would not be issued and no requirement for posting in the at the point of the business activity. And then the third part of the proposal is for individuals or sole proprietors, there would be a business activity test. Currently, all business entities, regardless of the legal entity type, are required to pay a minimum license fee regardless of the type of legal entity or the level of their business activity. Under the proposal, individuals or sole proprietors would go through a business activity test if their total gross receipts from their business activity are less than $4,400 in a year, then no minimum license fee would be due. And that's basically the changes to the minimum license fee proposal. The one clarification, the business activity test of $4,400 of gross receipts, not net profit, but gross receipt activity, is only for individuals or sole proprietors. Other legal business entities would still be required to pay the $100 minimum license fee.
You finished?
Yes, sir.
That's pretty
Said
brief.
to keep it quick.
Good job. Councilmember James, you're up first.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. O'Mara, I don't see in our packet the amended ordinance. Is there one written?
It has not been finalized. We are working with law, but it is not ready for release yet.
Okay, I think, I understand that it's great. I think it's wonderful that you obviously have heard from our citizens, because a lot of people called and said, okay, what if, and this isn't appropriate, and I think it's great that we're moving forward with amending that. I just think, I think that as council, we should be looking at the legislation and working from that. So if we can get a copy of that amended ordinance as soon as possible, and then work from that, I would look forward to getting that.
We'll do it.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Chair. For individuals, total gross receipts less than $4,400, would those folks have to file a return?
Well, we're grappling with that. They would not be required to pay an occupational tax.
I understand.
Whether they would still need to file to show that they fall within the business activity test is what we're trying to determine before that final legal draft is presented to you.
See, I mean, that's what gets under folks' skin. Because if, for example, you have a number of folks who hold a piece of property in each LLC that they have to file a separate return under this rule for each LLC, and then explain to the government that they don't have to pay the $100 because of one thing or another.
If I could clarify, an LLC is not a sole proprietor individual, so this business activity test would not apply to an LLC. We're talking about Schedule C or 1099 income on an individual's personal return. That's the type of business activity test, a sole proprietor individual that we're referring or proposing here.
And you understand that single member LLCs are disregarded for federal tax purposes. Are they also disregarded for our purposes of this?
No, that is a nuance that is significant for any pass-through entities. Partnerships, the federal government is at the ownership level, but a occupational business license tax is on the business entity that is doing the business activity within the jurisdiction. So a partnership files a return, pays their occupational tax before distribution to owners. A legal entity like an LLC, that is the business entity that is doing business, and the tax is assessed on the entity, not the individual owner.
Okay. But I'm talking about single member LLCs where it's disregarded.
I understand.
Same thing.
Same thing. It's an LLC, and our tax is at the business activity level.
This is a source of enormous frustration for business owners, that they have a number of LLCs that they use to segregate assets for liability and asset protection purposes. But they're required to file each a separate return and pay this $100. And I don't understand why that would be different if they were incorporated or organized as a corporation or as an LLC. I think we need to maybe think about the breadth of this and whether or not this would apply, because if you have an LLC that has business activity less than $4,400, why wouldn't that not apply to that as well?
We're looking at, the proposal is looking at individuals, those people who may have an activity that has some income, but in most likely is not a significant activity for their livelihood.
For example, my wife's a harpist. She makes less than $4,400 playing harp a year. If she was organized as an LLC, she would be required to file this, where there would be no substantive difference between her doing it individually than her doing it through an LLC. Because the only purpose of the LLC is for liability purposes and asset protection, things like that.
Well, and I guess I would respond, probably not to your agreement, but the decision on what type of legal entity in order to do your activity is the taxpayer's decision, and they weigh what is advantageous for selecting that type of legal activity, a business activity. And so there's federal tax planning, there's state tax planning, and there is local tax planning. They don't always match up to be the same. And an LLC...
It's also our decision whether or not to treat small businesses fairly, would you say?
Right. And as a tax administrator, I'll probably want to engage in further conversation with you because the LLC has filed with the state and said that they are a business activity. They filed and made that statement. And so the individual did not. All legal entities did, and they filed with the Secretary of State. They registered and declared what type of business activity they're declaring themselves to be in. And so I'm looking at LLCs as business activity. And also
if it's de minimis under 44. Well, we can talk about the policy later. But the point where this came up was that you have not decided, or we as a city haven't decided, whether or not individuals who make less than $4,400 still have to file a return.
Right. That would be clarified when we work with law and come through with the drafting of the ordinance.
I think that would significantly decrease the advantageous. It's $100, but they still have to fill it out and go take the time to do that, and that's still a drag on our folks. Particularly, what I'm always looking for are unintentional triggers. Folks who may not be sophisticated business people, not be aware of this, even though they don't owe a dime to the city, they might trip over one of our rules and not make a filing that might get them in trouble. So I think we should be very sensitive to that. Thank you, Chair.
Councilmember Blues.
Mr. O'Meara, what are the revenue implications for the city if this if this proposal becomes law?
Well, we don't have hard numbers. We have soft estimates. One of the things we track is how much net profit you paid and how much net profit you had. We don't track what your gross sales or receipts are, so I don't have that in a database to sort. But for instance, we looked at those people that paid us between $22.50 and $50. That was 1,200 taxpayers and about 37,000. We looked at people who paid between 50 and 75, and that was another 30,000. We have estimated that this is somewhere between $100,000 and $150,000.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Councilmember Lane.
I support that the LLC should turn in a statement because these smaller businesses may end up being bigger businesses, and if we don't have an ongoing relationship with them from a tax standpoint, then we would not be able probably to collect the money without an audit of some sort. Is that one of that's my perspective. Is that your perspective also?
That's the discussion going on within my division, and we're talking about whether it is more convenient for the taxpayer and the tax preparer to use the standard return with an extra line or have some sort of abbreviated half page just for these people. But you had 10,000 this year, you have 2,200 next year, you have 15,000 next year, you have 2,300 the next. And so by having an informational return is all we're looking for to designate that you qualify for this exemption was the discussion that we're having internally.
All right. I like the plan. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. O'Meara on this? Councilmember James.
Thank you. When will we see this issue again? When will we see the ordinance come back again? Will it be before we have to pass a budget? Or?
Oh, yes, ma'am. We're working with law now.
Okay, so it'll come back to the Budget and Finance Committee?
I think it would come to the CAL.
We're going to either bring it to a CAL or full work session because we won't have another meeting till June.
Okay. If it could be a CAL, that would be great
Yeah.
and give us a little bit more time to deal with it.
Yeah, that's why we
discuss
didn't
it.
want to have the resolutions prepared unless there was other changes Councilman wanted to make to it. That's why we did just a proposal first?
Well, you know, most municipalities actually work from an ordinance, and they make the changes as necessary. So I'd like to see the draft ordinance at a CAL, so it gives us time to work through it before it goes to a work session. Thank you. Thanks.
Anybody else? Thank you, Bill, for giving us that proposal.
Thank you very much.
Next is the monthly, you want to take over and do the monthly financial statements from March, I believe it is, we're on.
I will, sir, and I understood that our time was limited, so I have the three-sentence version, or we can go into more. I'll start with the summary, and basically, March financials, well, let me start with the piece of good news.
Do we have it for the overhead bill?
Yes.
Just put the good news up and leave the rest off?
All right, I will go straight to the good news. If you will look, the Fayette County unemployment rate, which we got just last week, came in at March at 8%. That is down from 8.6 in February. I would like to say 1 month makes a trend, but we'll have to wait and see how that goes. I did look at the variance between the same time last year, and if you go across from September through March, our current fiscal year unemployment rate has been running about 2% higher than the same month last year until you get to March 2010. In March 2010, we were at 7.9. This year, March 2009, we were at 7.9. This year, we're at 8.0, so that is only a 0.1% difference. That's significant in how we start to compare to year-over-year months to finish out the year. So we're looking for more positive variances for the fourth quarter.
Councilor James, you want to ask on
Yeah, just a real quick question about that unemployment rate. I've been doing a lot of research on unemployment rates and what they actually mean. The percentage that's there, is that the percentage based on the number of available jobs?
It is what the U.S. Department of Labor and Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes. I would have to defer to their site to get the actual definition.
I just don't want to be misled by that number, because we do know it doesn't include folks that have dropped off of receiving unemployment benefits, and I think it has something to do with the number of jobs that are actually available. But I don't know that for certain. But I love good news. But before we get to Cherry, I just would really like to drill down on what the unemployment, and I've asked for a presentation from someone. I haven't seen it yet. It was somebody maybe from Frankfurt or something that was going to give us. I've talked to Artie and maybe Anthony, and I don't know what's happened with that, but we really need to know what that number means so that we know really true expectations of the future. And I see Commissioner Rumpke nodding in agreement, and she probably knows what I'm talking about, because she's mentioned a few times in her presentation.
I guess the only rebuttal I would have is that even though I can't tell you, dissect exactly how the Labor Department computes it, I know that each month is comparable to, because it's computed the same way. That's the only feedback I can give. All right? The March actuals were lower than budget in all categories. The year-to-date, we are I jumped way too far. Our year-to-date, we are below budget 8.5 million. And we are still hoping that, compared to the projection of being 12.5 under budget by June 30, we're still hopeful that is a good projection. We have pressure at the net profit and the franchise fee lines. We're hopeful that withholdings will stay steady, and we do see some favorable variances in the service and other, primarily in detention revenue and EMS. And that would be the presentation.
Councilmember Allinger.
Thank you, Chair. We went through those pretty quickly.
Yes, sir.
We looked at the good stuff for a while, and then we went through the bad stuff pretty fast.
I tried.
I guess I want to look at where we are with our actual estimates, because
It's this
this one here.
This is our presentation. We've tried to keep consistent from month to month.
So could you go over again how we look at with the 12.5 built in and how we're going to hit this number?
Right now for withholdings, the way to read this is year-to-date, we're at 112 million. We're projecting to come in at 148 for withholdings. That means that we would need to collect an additional 36 million in the last 3 months. If you look at what actually happened last April through June, we collected 36 million. So if we meet the same as collected last year, we will make our assumption on withholdings. And so you read that each way down. The reason I said we have pressure, excuse me.
How have we done for the first 9 months, though? Because we've got to, in order to hit this, we've got to be exactly the same for the next 3 months as we were the following 3 months. How have we done from the 9 months to the prior 9 months? Because we're making the assumption we're going to stay exactly the same.
I don't have a 9-month number. I have the October through March, and we're 0.5% below the same period last year for withholdings.
So would you not think that we would stay consistent with that, or do you think we're going to?
Well, again, I'm looking at, we were 2% higher in unemployment at the same period last year. Now, for the first time in March, we're only 0.1%. Therefore, I'm hoping.
That still is a drop, though.
It's 0.1%, not 2%. So I'm hopeful that we will make the fourth quarter the same as last year. Still crystal ball.
And a rosy one at that, I think. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else on the first 9 months financial data? Okay, last item on our agenda.
You ready?
Yes, ma'am.
You're chairing. Who's chairing?
Technically, it needs to go over to Councilmember Gordon, but we'll
Okay.
just keep the ball rolling.
However you want this
We're
to
in the
go.
cow portion.
Well, good afternoon. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to lead you through what is proposed for capital debt in the mayor's proposed budget. You have a couple handouts in front of you. One of them is very detailed and would not project well up on the screen, which is why we have it in front of you, and that's the actual listing of proposed capital projects that we have brought forth in the mayor's proposed budget. And Bill, that's a separate handout from the listing of the projects is a separate handout from what I'm going to lead you through. So I'm going to lead you through these slides at a more consolidated basis, but then the individual projects are in front of you. Yes, ma'am. Oh.
This one, Nora.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
It says, it has this heading on it. And then there's a separate document that yes, that's correct.
Okay, and the separate document is?
What is it titled, Bill? I'm sorry.
2011 operating capital.
2011 operating capital. That has all the detailed projects. Councilmember Lawless may need a copy of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we're starting out, and this is a global picture of the entire budget, all funds, all projects, not just general funds. So I want to make sure everybody doesn't have a heart attack when they see these numbers, because they are big. In the mayor's proposed budget, there are 3 items from the FY10 budget that had been approved by the council that we are bringing forth that were unfunded during FY10 that we're proposing will be funded in FY11, and I'll go through that in just a moment. In addition, there is $41 million, and again, this is not just general fund. There's $41.5 million in additional projects being brought forth, and then the $31 million for pension contribution, for a total use of funds in the FY11 mayor's proposed budget of $74 million. Now, where are we going to get that money? We're proposing that $18.35 million would come from GO bonds. We have about another $9.2 from a sewer revenue bond. The state revolving fund debt is at $6.8 million. Pension obligation bonds, which actually technically our GO bonds, but we separated them out because I know we had talked about keeping the pension debt separate at $31 million, and then the various transfers of fund balances and cash at 8.6, and so that would be a use of funds. So again, that's just a global overview. I'm going to take you into the details now if there aren't any questions, Chair.
Are there any questions on this page? Can you tell us what the 2010 unfunded item is?
Yes, and I'm going to take you through that right now. It's on the very next
So
slide.
and again, just to summarize, you're proposing $74 million worth of bonds be issued this year.
No. If
That's
you
what
look
people
at
are
the
thinking,
use,
right.
okay, if you look at the use of funds, we would have 18.35 million in general obligation bonds, another
Which
9
we have
million,
to issue, right?
which we have not issued. This is all new. Everything that's on this slide would be new because it was my understanding that the committee wanted to see what more obligation would we be taking on by approving the mayor's proposed budget. Right. So that's how I've approached this. So it would be very succinct, and you'd have decision points by which you could make good decisions around what we're proposing.
Thank you.
So
That's good.
Is that good? Okay. Well, let me take it. It'll be more self-explanatory. Oh, I'm
Councilman
sorry.
Gordon had a question on this.
And you may be going to address this, but under your sources of funds, now sewer revenue bonds, is that sanitary sewer funds only?
Yes.
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 And then cash transfers and fund balance are, does transfers include other enterprise funds, money transferred from,
Yes.
for example, water quality,
For example,
landfill, et cetera?
in that number, and let me give you those two because I've got them right here in front of me. Out of the 8.6 million that's up on this screen, $1.4 million is for water quality. 2.28 million is for landfill, and I certainly, and is this schedule in there? I can get you the schedule, Councilmember Gordon, just to show the 8.6 million, the various uses.
I think it's pretty important.
Yes, and I'm happy to provide
Okay.
that for you.
Thank
Not a
you.
problem. Director O'Mara has just pointed out, thank you, Bill, on that other handout, on the operating capital, it says 2011 operating capital. The actual detail is there, but then I just had a quick reference schedule that I've been talking from, Councilmember Gordon.
So this other one has the fund
Yes.
sources?
It does.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. With that, I think it'll get more self-explanatory.
On this, I think Councilman Beard had a question on this
Oh,
slide.
pardon me.
What do we have rolling off in dollars next year?
If you can let me get to the third slide, I think I'll be able to.
Okay, I'm just looking for a net increase or obviously
Sure.
not a decrease, but.
And we'll take you through that if I could just get to that
That's
slide.
fine.
Is that okay?
Councilmember James.
Yeah, and I don't want to disrupt you
Oh, no, it's fine.
as you're going through, but if you could, as you're going through, identify the projects that council enumerated in our last CIP meeting. We rated for some projects to come up again. So as you're going through, if you can identify what those projects are that are included, they weren't discussed to be included in the mayor's proposed budget. They were to be discussed prior to the mayor's budget coming forward.
And I don't know if I have that with me, and Bill, I don't know if you have that in your folder either. But I can get an email out right after this meeting to get it back to you. I just don't physically have it with me.
Okay, thanks.
I apologize.
Thanks.
Okay.
You're good to go.
Okay. Oh, sorry. So this next slide, and what we have done is we have combined the capital expenditures, which again are detailed for you in that other handout, by division. And so as you can see, the three items, Chair, that you had asked about that were in the unfunded 2010 list, There is a portion of that for fire that has to do with repair of Station Number 6 roof and the fire training tower. There was a portion of that in FY10, and then the balance of that is being proposed in the FY11. You'll see $50,000 under Public Works. That was corridors. That was in the FY10. Being brought forth as part of the mayor's proposed budget in FY11. And then $1 million of the PDR was was approved by the council in the FY10, but because they did not have the matching available, it was carried forward for the FY11, and that's how we came up with the $2 million. The balance of those, I think, are fairly self-explanatory if you look at the individual lists. So there's $1.47 million of 2010 projects that had already been approved, another $18 million and change in what's being brought forth, and then for a total of $19.5 million in total capital. Now, if you look below, again, we're trying to stay consistent on sources and uses. If you look at what the funding sources would be for what's being proposed, we would have the $50,000, the $1.15 million that we were putting in the contingency fund for the real estate contingency fund, if you recall the presentation on the mayor's proposed budget. And then the balance was, and it just went out of my head, the council office copier. Those three items would be in that cash line because we would not go out and bond for those three items. The remaining portion of the projects would be bonded for, and that's that $18.35 million, which foots to the first page. Okay.
Councilmember James.
Chair, I'm not sure if this is the time to say that or not, but when will we be able to address the unfunded 2010 projects that we discussed as a council and plugging those in? Because I think that conversation even came up before the $1 million for the PDR. It was $1 million for infill and redevelopment, and I don't know the others that were put on the back burner to allow the other things to move forward.
Land bank roads.
Infill and redevelopment,
Park
which
Trail.
translated. Yeah, so when
During
will
the
we
budget
be?
link process, I mean, again, they're just presenting what the mayor's proposed. Then it would be during our link process and then during our CAL meetings to bring all that back up and have a CAL meeting on that. They're just showing us what's in the budget today. They're not telling us what necessarily we can do.
I understand that. I just didn't think it was a council-only thing. I mean, I thought it was an administration and council together. We were all in the room together on that day.
Well, this is their recommendation, so.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
And we will get that list back out to you, Councilmember James.
And then Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you. Just a quick question to be sure I'm tracking.
Okay.
So as you go through this general, for example, community corrections, mayor's proposed 105,600. That relates back to the detail for that. Is that what's reflected under mattresses?
Yes, that's correct.
So as we go down through the general, it is reflected in the specifics on this other sheet?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I echo Councilmember James's concerns, because I thought that's what we were going to be doing in this meeting, was taking up those items that we had tabled at the last time we looked at the capital projects. I know that we had carved off a piece of the distillery district. We had put on hold the $3 million infuse into the repaving that had been done for several years previous. So I guess, and I've been holding off. I've brought up from time to time, but the desire to continue with the $3 million bonding of repaving funds, because every single one of us has a very, very long list of repaving, and the list gets longer every year. And if we, just like other things that have been let go through the years, if we don't keep up with our annual repaving, we're going to get too far behind. So, Councilmember Stennett, should we just bring these up ad hoc in the council work session, or should we?
At this point in the presentation, again, this is just showing us what is in the budget. We can have that discussion today if we have time. We can have it at any CAL meeting, during any link meeting. I'm just saying today's schedule was to show us what's in the budget so you understand and I understand what they propose. That's it. We don't have to agree to it today. We can change it today, whatever you want to do, but there'll be plenty of conversation. This is just the beginning, very beginning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just so you would have a starting point to work from. Are you ready for the next slide? Okay. So if you take the $18.353 million that was reflected on the first slide, and then we know that we would bond for the pension bonds, the total in the mayor's proposed budget that we would go forward with from a bonding perspective would be $49.35 million. And again, that's just, we didn't put a lot of detail in there. You asked for the specifics. We're happy to get it, but that's what we'd be looking at. So here's the debt service, and Councilmember Beard, we're looping back around here on your question. So right now, let me get to that page, forgive me. Our existing, if you look into FY11, our existing capital debt service will be $23.845 million for next year. In addition, if we floated bonds for the $18.35 million worth of projects that were proposed, we would have an interest-only payment of approximately, and again, it would depend on how much we do, but based on what we're putting out here, interest-only payment on that $18 million of $376,500. That assumes we would issue in the fall. There are a lot of assumptions there that obviously could change. So then our total capital debt service in FY11 would be $24.2 million. Now, to that, and Councilmember Martin, I know we're trying to keep the pension portion separate. We have $8.6 million in existing pension debt service. That does include what the council just approved last Thursday. So that does include the $35 million that we just bonded in that debt service. There is not additional debt service that's being projected because of the timing of when we put it in. It would actually fall into FY10. Is that correct, Bill? Or excuse me, FY12. Forgive me. So our total GO debt service would be $32.9 million. Again, assuming everything was done on the previous pages that we just discussed. Bill, I don't know if you have the extended schedule so that we could answer Councilmember Beard as to what was rolling off in FY11. So it would be the three.
It's the difference between the capital debt service ending for 2011 and we start with 21.2. We ended at 20.
So it's roughly $3 million is rolling off. If you look at capital debt service of $24.22 million, and then you go to the top of the FY 2012 impact, and it says 21.29. The difference between those two numbers is actually what would be rolling off, Councilmember Beard. So approximately $3 million would be rolling off of debt service that we currently have, which is why that's a lower number, obviously. And so if you take a look at the FY12, and this is where it's very, very important that we think about the impact of our decisions on capital, the full impact of, if we took this mayor's proposed budget forward, the full impact of the decision the council would be making would be 1.365 million. So that's a real decision point. Do we want to add 1.365 million in additional debt service to already our existing debt service? And then you can take that a step further and look at the pension, excuse me, the pension debt, and that's an additional 2.585 million, which is also a decision point for council. So if you look at the impact of everything that's being brought forward, you're looking at about 3.9 million in additional debt service. And again, we had to make some assumptions on rates, et cetera. But those are the kinds of decision points that I think council needs to focus on as we decide what projects are included in our final approved budget. Is what is that full impact of additional debt service look like, and how will that impact not 2011, but it's actually 2012 because of how the timing of the debt service happens. We have interest only typically on our bonds for the first payment. And I think I'll stop there so that if there are any questions. Oh, by the way, Councilmember Beard, what is rolling off as far as principal is one of the stormwater bonds. I think it's the 2000D bond is what's actually scheduled to roll off, and then some smaller things. Just FYI. This is a lot to absorb, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Martin, are you still up here? Okay, Councilmember Lawless.
I have a couple of questions. As I go through this list of bonding, it seems like many of these things are operational costs rather than something that you would use bonds to. So is there some rationale?
Could you
for that?
give me an example of?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few here. Bonding Herbies.
Well, first of all, I don't.
$285,000.
Right. One of the things that I think it's important for the council to understand is we're in a position right now that we need to reserve as much cash as we possibly can. We've had lengthy conversations just a few weeks ago, actually 2 weeks ago, with our rating agencies, and they feel very strongly that we are in great need of retaining every dollar that we can during these challenging economic times based on what Bill has presented to you from a revenue front. And so we are bringing forth many things that in a normal year where we have strong revenues from withholding in our big four, we would normally just cash flow these, but we're not in a situation that we really feel that we can cash flow these and also maintain the kind of cash reserves that we feel we need to have so that we can maintain our AA rating, if you remember back a couple meetings ago when they presented that. So,
and I'm sorry to keep beating a dead horse to death, but this was exactly the issue that was brought up when we were talking about the 10% reduction in our urban service fund. And now we're bonding trash cans to keep our cash flow or our cash reserve high. So I just would like more information at some point on the rationale other than, I mean, that doesn't seem like good business sense to me.
You finished, Councilmember Lawless?
Yes, sir, I'm sorry. Thank
okay.
you. Thank you,
Councilmember
Councilman.
Crosby.
Well, I would just say that perhaps we need to look at our fees for some of these different enterprises we have, because obviously if we're utilizing what people are paying fees for, such as Herbie's, Lenny's, and things like that, but we're keeping that cash flow high to keep our rating, we're doing it on the backs of our taxpayers to float, as you said, these things that we normally wouldn't in other years. And I think that some people feel like they're feed to death, and I think this is a perfect example of probably an area where the fee has just accumulated. Now they have a huge surplus, and we're reserving that and not utilizing it for necessarily what people are paying the fee for.
Well, if you'll look, and we only are looking at general fund right now, but as we go through some of the other funds, there are actual capital projects that some of the fund balances are being used for. So,
well, I would argue, though, that when you're asking us to make decisions about a pension fund, which we are required to put into, but yet we're having to make, and that's what'd you say, three some odd $1 million, but yet we're going to bond certain things that we already pay fees to cover. I think, at least in my mind, I'm thinking, why are we doing this when there's a dedicated fee to pay for these things, but we are obligated to do the other? And then you're going to put us in a position to have to decide that we can't pay the additional money, perhaps, so that we can have Lenny's. I mean, that's just, I'm just thinking out loud, but that's so that we show a positive cash flow. It just doesn't seem right. Thank you.
And before we go on to that point, we are using the Urban Services Fund surplus that Councilman Crosby just alluded to pay these bonds for projected items, correct? You're using the dedicated fee money to pay the bonds on the dedicated fee items?
on the dedicated fee items, yes, that's correct.
Kirby's and everything, so
Yeah.
it's coming out of that same cash pile? So we would, okay. Just wanted to clarify that.
The
before.
general fund, a GO obligation, you're going to use the revenues from the general fund. The very last page of the second handout that we gave, it says total general fund bonded operating capital and CIP FY11, Mayor's proposed budget. And if you look at the items that we're proposing out of general fund, the Herbie and Rosie's are coming out of the general fund. There are other projects that are coming out of urban services, and that's what we'll be covering in a minute.
So to clarify Councilman Crosby's point, we're using general fund dollars to pay on an urban service fund purchase item that's covered under a dedicated fee for solid waste?
Yes.
Okay, Councilman Gordon.
Well, this is just daylighted something I think we need to have a long discussion about, because that's exactly why our citizens pay the fee into the special fund, is to fund things like Rosie's, Lenny's, and Herbie's. And so I have a great concern about that. Our general fund shouldn't be paying for that. I mean, that's my opinion, and there might be other opinions, but if our citizens are paying a dedicated fee for those kinds of things, then they should be guaranteed that it's going toward those kinds of things.
Well, and I think what I would say to that is that we are stepping back and looking at the urban county government as a whole, as the rating agencies have looked at us as a whole, and where we have cash balances, we are trying through this next year to keep everything afloat and keep everything as stable as possible with respect to our cash balances. So if you pay cash for the Herbies and Lenny's out of the Urban Service Fund, we absolutely can do that. But what I will tell you is that the rating agencies look at the total liquidity of the urban county government, not just a single fund. So we absolutely could pay cash. It's not that we can't pay cash. What I'm bringing forward is, if we want to do less in bonding, I mean, as far as projects go, we could do that too. But at the end of the day, you have an overall liquidity that you are trying to balance.
Well, I understand that, and I think everybody up here understands that. what our citizens have asked about, and one of the reasons that we built an audit into the water quality fee ordinance is that our citizens need to be guaranteed that when they pay a fee for a specific service, that's where the money's going. And so I think first my duty as a council member is to be sure those fees and those taxes are going for those services. And if it means that we have to bond fewer things, maybe that's the choice we should be making, rather than take money from a fee or a tax fund that's dedicated and not spending it there, but spending general fund money there. So I guess I'm expressing a little frustration right now because this is kind of highlighting an issue that I think is a bottom line heart of government taxes and fees issue, and that is to be responsible to the citizens. So I think probably we'll have more discussion on this specific issue in the future.
Councilmember Lane.
Well, I think we touched on a couple of the thoughts that I had, but maybe I'm a little bit ahead. I was just looking at the 2011 bond fund, and there's over $1 million worth of containers, like Rosie, Lenny, Herbie's, and all that would be funded. And I don't know, is that a 5-year depreciable item? Do y'all know?
I think we decided it was 5, wasn't it? Yeah.
Because mine's been there 10 years. It's still good. And then there's also a truck for refuse collections. And that's like 5.8. So
Right,
you're looking
5.8
at
million.
maybe $7 million. That's not small potatoes as far as in expenditure. And those are all capital items, so I don't have a problem with bonding that.
Councilmember Lawless. I'm sorry, Councilmember Beard. Then Lawless.
In looking at the same question, are these refuse cards, Lenny's, the Rosies, the Herbies, the pitch-in containers, loan a box, whatever that is, are they bundled up in a 10-year bond, a 20-year bond, or more realistically a 5-year bond?
Well, we would go to market, typically we go with a 20-year bond, 10-year callable, if you recall the last presentation. But then we have various lives of items within that bond. So you have 3, 5, 10, 20-year properties, and they basically smooth it. So we're not paying for the Rosies over 20 years. We're paying for them over their life of 5 years.
Okay, that's what I was concerned about. Whether that was,
Right.
we'd be upside down on our
Like a vehicle.
Rosies,
Right.
which isn't fun to be upside down on a Rosie.
Little stinky.
Councilmember Lawless. Councilmember James.
Thanks, Chair. Commissioner Rumpke, you weren't, I don't know if you were here when there was, I guess it was last budget year. Were you here last budget year? Okay. There was a lot of conversation about what some called a surplus in the Urban Services Fund. And it was quite a dynamic discussion because it was, as I'm recalling it, is I was on the Public Works link for 2 years, and I heard from Commissioner Taylor about how when she had investigated and talked to Director Feast and others at Waste Management about why in the world is the amount so high that's in this fund. And what they had been told is they had put things on hold. And they didn't make purchases, cash purchases, and it caused a big ruffle around this horseshoe because that was the argument that was used as to why we needed to really investigate what was happening at Waste Management, because this amount of money was sitting there. And so hearing you now talk about allowing cash to sit in order to affect a bond rating or to make it more favorable, it all makes sense to me now. I'd not heard it before, but that may have been what was happening previously as well. When they were here talking to us about AA ratings and such, and one of the questions I had was about the bond system, the rating system, and the agencies. And I think they get their name bond very well. I feel like we're in bondage to the rating agencies. It's almost like having a mortgage during the economic downturn and not having, you feel trapped. And so what did a lot of people do when they were in bondage to their mortgage companies? They either left their houses sitting there to the squatters, or they try to rent it out to somebody else, but they did something different because they realized that system wasn't working. And I said it while they were here, Moody's and other rating agencies are being called to question. And I have a difficult time. Here we are again. We're looking at a budget. We're looking at needs. And we're still being held hostage by the bond agencies, bond rating agencies. And I think we need, I'm going to say it again, and I say it every month, we need a different revenue plan. We need something different to deal with what it is that we need to do. And here we are again at a time when it's going to be a long conversation, and Andrew, that's what I'm going to hear. Andrew, we don't have time to have that discussion. We've got a budget that we need to pass. But I've been saying it all year. So we need your help in figuring out some other type of revenue system rather than the bond market, which in my opinion is just as reliable as the mortgage market during the economic downturn at this point. This is the only way that some people are making money at this point, is by governments like us saying, we got to do projects, I guess we got a bond, and stacking up money that is supposed to be going for a particular purpose, when that's all we've heard is, why doesn't Waste Management use their money to pay cash for a truck when we've got it sitting in there? So I want your critique on that, but really more so than that, do you understand, and does the administration understand and have a plan as to a revenue? I know I'm not saying taxes, and I know that's the first thing that people go to, but you just get to a point where you realize we can't be bound by the same thing we were bound before, when it obviously by these numbers has been a failed system.
A couple comments, and again, I didn't come till late October, so I wasn't with you during the last budget cycle, but we did pay cash for almost $8 million. It was 7.5, maybe $7.7 million in refuse collection trucks out of that fund. So we had a large fund balance drop. And so I'm assuming in response to the conversation of the council, we did move forward in paying cash for some of those items because, to your point, we needed it. The other thing that I wanted to comment before I move to revenue is that we're in unusual times right now, and it's really a delicate balance, which is why I drew council's eye to those two debt service numbers of what we're actually committing to. There's good and bad ways to borrow, and when you look at the environment that we're in right now, there have been some really awful things happen, and you've just talked about them. Our revenues are depressed, et cetera, but the interest rates are also depressed. So one of the reasons that we obviously went forward with the pension bond was because we could borrow at a lower rate and save us millions in the future by borrowing low now. I think, to your point, that is a delicate balance. We should take advantage of the environment that we're in, and our rating provides us with lower rates. And if I may, I told Council Member Stennett that I would share this with you. Excuse me. For example, our pension bond last week, we got a 4.95% rate, which is an excellent rate. And because of our rating and because of what this council has done from a fiscal management standpoint, we had a lower discount, and it actually allowed us to pick up an additional $400,000 that we put towards the pension. So when I say it's a delicate balance, I think, it's our responsibility as leadership to take a look at these projects and understand what we absolutely need to include and borrow as we can afford to write the check. And then the other part of that is balancing the ability to borrow at that rate, which, if you want to call it being held hostage, there are days I certainly feel that way, but the reality is they're telling us, look, you can have this rating if you keep these balances. And so what I've brought forward in the mayor's proposed budget is trying to balance the two. And I think that that's what the council is charged with, is what's that happy medium. On the revenue piece, just very quickly, I know Jerry has us scheduled for a separate revenue projection discussion, and certainly, Bill, myself, others have really been racking our brains. How do we smooth out our revenues beyond just raising taxes? And it's a difficult proposition, because whether you call it a fee or you call it a tax, it's something else that's layered on to a taxpayer. So in trying to balance that, I mean, we even talked about rolling back just that occupational license fee, and that's $100,000 to $150,000. So that's less that we're going to get in. So how do we make good decisions around that? And I'm certainly open for more conversation. But I wanted you to know we are talking about those things, and it's the delicate balance that I think we're charged with today.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that helps.
It does, thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Chair.
Councilmember Henson.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, I just wanted to comment too. I mean, that I think if we have a dedicated fee, then those fees should be used for what they're there for. And with the surplus, I think that money's invested. Is that correct?
The surplus in that fund, yes, that's correct.
So if we weigh out the options of the cost for the bonds on these items and withdrawing the money from the surplus, and I just have a real problem with this coming out of the general fund, I have to be honest, and I hope that the links take a good hard look at that.
Councilmember Henson, if I could share with you, both Moody's and S&P were very specific with Director Romero and I last week, and basically said, if our fund balance, we're really on the edge of going out of a AA rating. And so that means it's going to cost us more, and we don't know how many individuals would actually bid on our bonds. So again, while I would prefer to pay cash, the challenge is in the general fund right now, there isn't a lot. And so it truly is a balance. I'm not in disagreement with you. However, I think, we're going to have to look at it overall, which is why I started with the first slide, to get a feel for what are we actually going to have to look at as an urban county, not just the general fund piece.
Are we digging ourselves into a hole by taking on more capital than we can actually afford? And are these absolutely necessary? This is almost like on my personal budget, charging my groceries so that I'll have cash. So is it necessary?
And that's what I believe that the chair was talking about in the individual links. As you all are discussing with the various directors and commissioners, this is exactly what we should be talking about.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have a couple more questions, but Commissioner, can you clarify, why can't we use the surplus money to pay the debt service? You said
Which surplus money? I'm sorry.
The Urban Service Fund, the Solid Waste Fund. you keep saying either pay cash or bond it from the general fund. Why can't you bond it from the solid waste fund?
I don't think you can bond in the solid waste fund.
Well, you can enter a GO bond, but pay the service from the solid waste surplus.
Do you know? Yeah, our new budget director is here, Ryan Barrow, who comes from the municipal finance sector, and certainly we can absolutely look into that. Let me just, maybe a better way to position that is.
The revenue bond.
Yeah, we have not looked at that in the past, but to Councilmember James's point, I think we've got to look at everything.
Yeah. Councilmember Crosby.
Actually, we had these questions. We had solid waste in on Friday. Unfortunately, we didn't have, I think Commissioner Rumke was out in the afternoon, and Mary was also not in. So you will probably be receiving a whole bunch of questions because, frankly, nobody was there or could answer any of our questions when it came to these issues. We did ask them during our meeting. So we hope you will come on Friday, and maybe we'll be able to follow up on some of
I will
this.
not be here this Friday.
That's wonderful.
I'm sorry.
It is what it is. We'll just, we may have to have a separate meeting with you on another day.
That would be fine.
To work with your schedule. Quickly, you mentioned some of the fees and things, and I know we're talking about capital projects, but I'm curious, are there any new fees built into this budget?
I believe, and I know some of the other commissioners are here, in the, just off the top of my head, in parks, there was a proposed increase in the golf fee as well as the pool admission. Those are the two that pop in my head, Councilmember Crosby.
And would that require council action to approve this? The fees are built into the budget. I guess my question was, the fees were built into the budget.
They're proposed.
And we're going to have to approve a budget. I guess at what point were we going to learn that there are fee increases built into the budget?
It was discussed very specifically in the General Services Council links. So
well, that's
I
three people
assume
at the
that
council. I guess
that
so.
comes back.
They're
for
going to bring it
discussion.
back to the link. The link's going to report out to the council
On May 20th.
I guess during the mayor's proposed budget address, we didn't hear anything about an increase in fees, so that's why I was specifically asking. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have about 13 minutes left. If there's any other question on the debt, I also want to get to our next meeting and discuss the format for our next meeting, which is Tuesday. So, Councilmember Martin, on debt. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner, what sources of surplus are we finding in various dedicated funds?
I don't know if I can answer that off the top of my head. I apologize.
Well, the thing that I'm getting at is that the amount of debt that we're going to have to incur to take on the bring the police and fire pension up to solvency is enormous.
It is.
And I think we have to really seriously think about looking for half a penny here and there from other existing sources so that we can put together perhaps a special fund to retire that. Because that is going to challenge our bond rating in an enormous way. And in these difficult times, I think we have to, and with this amount of debt, I think we have to look at, what taxes are we currently collecting that we could dial back a little bit in order to put together a special police and fire fund. Nobody wants to obviously put a new tax because folks can't really do that in these times. The other part is how would we put together some sort of referendum for the public to do this? What would be required, and what would be the steps for us to put that together?
I'd have to defer to Bill. Do you know what kind of referendum as far as putting together
I think that's a whole
tax?
other discussion for a whole other time, Councilman. If we can keep it on point on their presentation, we have plenty of other meetings to address that issue because we have two other people that like to speak.
And we can certainly make note of that and do some research. I just don't know off the top of my head.
But as we decide what we're going to bond, I think that's going to affect us greatly because otherwise we're going to end up with a less than a AA rating. Thank you, Chair.
Well, my list changed. Councilmember Gordon.
I just have a quick 10-second question based on Councilmember Crosby's questions. Can you please bring us, maybe within the next week, the list of built-in fee or any kind of fee increases that are built into the budget?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Bill, could
thank
you write that down for me? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else on the presentation from Commissioner Rumke? Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Our next CAL meeting for the budget is scheduled for Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. There's a couple items, I think, that, one, this was labeled, if you look on your schedule, budget planning meeting. Councilmember James alluded to a couple budget and finance meetings ago to get together in some type of retreat, either off-site, some type of budget actually planning meeting is what we called it, to plan council's what we want to do with the budget and what our strategy is going forward. So we'll do that Tuesday. Do you think we need to start maybe at 10 a.m. instead of 11? The other thing we need to tackle was the bonding and debt again that Councilmember Martin and Councilmember James talked about today. So we can use the meeting for those two things because I think the planning comes real into those debt items we talked about. And that, I think Tim would give us 3 hours. It's scheduled for 11 right now, but we can maybe move it to 10. Is that okay? Do you? What link is that?
It's the link chaired by Councilmember Meyer.
It starts at 8 a.m. You think you can be done? Has he not? No, Councilmember Grayson. I just don't want to cut it short on. I think this meeting is very important, especially with the debt discussion and the planning going forward. You're showing at 9:30 ending till 9:30. Well, so 10 o'clock Tuesday morning. So it's already scheduled for 11. We'll move it till 10 if everybody's okay with that. Councilmember James.
Another agenda item that you and I just talked about were questions for the budget links. We've in the past had, I don't know if it's 5 questions. I can't remember how many it is, but it gives you at least some, it gives us some commonality throughout the links so that when we're reporting back, we know just some general questions that we're all asking. So I'd like to talk about that as well. And if it's okay to offer my next suggestion. When I was going through the budget book, and I don't know, for the new council members, you may not know this, I don't know if you do or not, but during the budget process is also when any reorganization can be done. So within your budget book, there's an organizational chart. There are some changes in the mayor's proposed budget organizational chart. There's at least one, if not more, that I've noticed, and this determines the flow of things in our government. So I'd like to ask on Tuesday if we can discuss maybe having an organizational chart committee to where we could actually discuss the org chart and make sure that everything's flowing effectively and efficiently. And if there's any suggestions, I know that there is a group working on a natural resource proposal for a natural resource division of government. And there's been discussion of a housing division, which I guess had existed years ago, coming back into play to help deal with some of our housing issues and some of the recommendations out of infill and redevelopment, Affordable Housing Trust Fund, Social Services Needs Assessment, the Central Sector Small Area Plan, the Easton Small Area Plan, and other things. But I want to give you some time to think about that, and then on Tuesday maybe discuss whether you think it advisable to do a organizational chart committee to where we could talk about maybe any possible changes there. Thank you.
That definitely can be accomplished during the planning, what we need to plan on working on. Absolutely. Anything else for Tuesday? Again, 10 a.m. CAL meeting. We'll talk about questions of format for link report out, planning, the budget planning process, and then also our debt and bonds. So if Commissioner, if you could give us a list of what's still out there from FY 09 and 010 that we haven't bonded yet, and we can pick up with that discussion too. Anything else for Tuesday? Councilmember Gordon.
My question isn't about Tuesday. It's about something that was asked in this meeting.
Go right
Is
ahead.
it time? And it's quick. Councilmember Crosby, who chairs the Public Works and Development and Environmental Quality Link, mentioned that no one was there to answer our questions, and You stated, Commissioner, that you can't be there at our next meeting. So can you please send someone who would know the answers to questions? Is there someone who
It depends which questions. Mary Pfister is taking a well-deserved 2-week vacation, and I had this on my calendar when I joined the Urban County, so I apologize that I can't be here. But what types of questions are you looking for so I can send the appropriate representative?
They had a lot to do with indirect cost and how it's assigned. They had a lot to do with dedicated funds and how the monies are dispersed and the process of how those monies are received by Urban County government and how they flow out to the departments and divisions.
I can tell you that Mary Pfister is probably the best suited as far as the flow of funds. I did some extensive research on the indirect costs because I knew that you had that question. It had been presented to me after your links meeting. So I do have that information that I could share in advance. I don't know that someone in her area would give you what you need.
If you could share the information you have about indirect cost in advance, that might be helpful to our
to get started, and then we're happy to follow up on anything.
Thank you.
Councilmember Crosby.
And after we get through Friday, if we get that information up front, we probably will just have to set up a meeting, I think, with you individually as a link to maybe go through some of the stuff that we did have questions on, because even if you send it to us, we probably will still have questions. Thank you.
No problem.
Anything else to come before the committee? We're adjourned.